So this is the review for the chapter on fault-tolerant systems. So you do need to know the different kinds of failures which are possible. You should be able to define what a crash failure is, what an omission failure is, what a software failure is, what a transient failure is, a temporal failure, a security failure, and a Byzantine failure. So you should be able to give the reasons for such a failure happening and what causes it and what happens when such a failure occurs, right? So you should be able to define each of these failures. I think you have some questions to define some of these failures in your homework. So and similar lines, you will be asked about different kinds of failures and you should be able to define them. Now, you should also know the 4 kinds of fault tolerance and you should also be able to define them. The 4 kinds that we looked at were masking tolerance, non-masking tolerance, fail-safe fault tolerance, and graceful degradation. So you should be able to define each of these 4 kinds of fault tolerance, and you should be able to give an example each of these kinds of fault tolerance. So other than that, you should know how to define a backward error recovery and a forward error recovery. So I think this was also a question in your homework. So that is one thing you need to prepare. So you need to know what are the different kinds of failures. You need to know what are the 4 kinds of fault tolerance: masking, non-masking, fail-safe, and graceful degradation. And you need to know the 2 kinds of error recovery: backward error recovery and the forward error recovery. All right, so now moving on, so you need to know the how the triple modular redundancy works, right? So how does it work when you have 3 replicas and one of them fails, right? And you should be able to define what n modular redundancy is. Okay, you need to know what the relationship between the total number of processes, the total number of replicas, right, and the total number of failed replicas is, right? So you should be able to tell the relationship between them. Now, moving forward, you need to know how the Stennings protocol works, right? So it's like a simple stop and wait protocol, right? It's like a simple stop and wait protocol. You should be able to explain the Stennings protocol in your own words, right? So how a message is sent and you wait to send the next message until you receive the acknowledgement from the receiver, and then after receiving the acknowledgement is when you send the next message. So you should be able to describe in your own words how the Stennings protocol works. Now, moving forward, you should know how the sliding window protocol works, right? You should be able to define what the window size is and how the messages, at most, the window size number of messages can be sent to the receiver, and what happens when there is a message that is lost, or when an acknowledgement is lost, how you have to basically resend all the messages from starting from the lost message. So you need to be able to describe the sliding window protocol in your own words. You do not need to remember the pseudocode of the Stennings protocol or the sliding window protocol, right? However, you do need to know how to describe it in your own words, how it works, right? Moving forward, you should know how the last one, which is the alternating bit protocol, works, right? So you need to know how each of these protocol works: the Stennings protocol, the sliding window protocol, and the alternating bit protocol. right? And once again, you do not need to remember the specifics. You do not need to remember the pseudocode. You need to be able to describe it in your own words, the working of each of these three protocols. All right. Now, how TCP works, this was just a brief overview into the field of networking. You do not need to study slides from here onwards about how the TCP works, right? You don't need to look into this section for the final exam.